Hi, this is Dan Heisman, and we're here to give you another YouTube video help you improve your chess. So I just finished watching the Queen's Gambit miniseries on Netflix, and of course it's been widely acclaimed, and if you're a chess player, you're gonna really like it, I'm sure. And I don't want to give away any of the plot, of course, if you haven't seen it, but like all popularized chess shows, there's got to be a part where they're playing in the park. So, Searching for Bobby Fischer had an important part. Larry Fishburne in that movie played the hustler in the park that Josh Waitzkin plays. So I have my own park story, and I thought I'd tell it to you. Back in Memorial Day 2008, my wife and I went downtown Philadelphia to go to a nice restaurant and eat dinner. And so we had a nice dinner, and after the dinner, we were out walking off the excess calories. And my wife said to me, "Oh, we're near Rittenhouse Square. Isn't there a hustler that usually plays over there? Why don't you go over and play him a game of chess?" Now, you have to understand, my wife's not exactly my manager. This was the first time, and maybe the last time, she ever said something like that to me. So I was really surprised. I said something like, "Are you sure? Are you kidding?" And she said, "Sure, go ahead." So we walked up to Rittenhouse Square, and sure enough, Brian the Hustler was there. Brian, when it's nice weather, Brian hangs out at Rittenhouse Square. Now, Brian likes to play backgammon also, and he used to play in the Skittles room like at the big CCA tournaments like the World Open or the National Chess Congress. And I would sometimes play him in backgammon for money at the Skittles room. So he probably knew my face, but I hadn't played him much chess, so he would hustle for chess and backgammon at the big tournaments. So I went up to him at the park, and I said, "Brian, would you like to play?" And I don't think he really remembered me. Now, to give you a little idea, even though by the time I played this game I was like 58 years old, Brian's not that much younger than I am. And, I was the champion of Philadelphia when I was 23, and Brian is a park hustler, so he's good at that kind of chess. But I'm the better player. Let's say if Brian had a USCF rating, which I looked in the database, I didn't see him, but if he played, it was probably before the USCF database was established in 1991. But anyway, Brian would probably be, 1900 or 2000, maybe a little stronger in hustling kind of games. So Brian said, okay, and he got out his set, and I said, "Do you have a clock?" And Brian had a friend of his there, and he asked his friend to look in the bag, and his friend said, "I don't see a clock here." And Brian says, "Well, I don't think we'll need it. The last game I played only took 5 minutes anyway." So I kind of smiled to myself, and I said, "I don't think this game's going to take 5 minutes." Anyway, so Brian offered to play for $5. And I said, I didn't want to take his money. So I said, "If you'd like, I'll just play you for free." And he gave me kind of a look and said, "I don't play for free." I said, "Okay." Didn't want to make it seem like I'm trying to take his money, because that wasn't the purpose. So I sat down at the board and we played the game. Now, I didn't have a score sheet, so I had to remember the whole game when I went home. So hopefully with the game you're about to see will look almost identical. I know the start and the end, there was a couple moves in the middle where I wasn't sure of the transpositions, but this is the game. Here we go. I'm black. We pick for color, and I got black. So Brian plays E4, I play C5. Sicilian, he plays the chameleon Sicilian, knight E2. Usually this transposes into open Sicilians when people play one white plays D4 in the next couple moves. But I have to be careful about where I put my pieces and what kind of open Sicilian I'm willing to transpose into. So I played knight C6. That means I can't play a Nahdorf or a dragon, but there's still lots of openings I can play if he plays D4. Brian plays the Sicilian chameleon move, knight b to c3. And again, I have to decide, do I want to play g6 and allow him to play a accelerated dragon? Or do I want to play like e6, and if we play an open Sicilian, I can play a Sicilian 4 knights, or maybe a Taimanov. So I decide to go for the latter course, and I play e6. All right, so Brian now has to make a decision. Is it going to be open Sicilian with d4, or is it going to be something else? He decides to play g3 and play it like a closed Sicilian. Okay, well, that tells me what to do now. I have an idea what I want to play against this kind of closed Sicilian. The main closed Sicilian would have f4 and knight f3. So this kind of closed Sicilian is a little bit less dangerous. So I played g6. Normally, you don't put all your pawns on white squares like this on one side of the board because you get a weak dark square complex. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to fianchetto the bishop and put the knight behind the f-pawn with the idea of either playing d6 or d5 depending on what white does. So Brian plays bishop g2, I play bishop g7, and now d4 is stopped. So we're pretty much going to get a close Sicilian-y kind of position. He castles, I play knight g7 according to plan. It would not be right with this pawn structure to put your knight on f6. You'd be very hard placed to find a Grandmaster game where they had this kind of weakened pawn structure with all the pawns on light squares where they didn't keep their pieces behind the pawns. Putting the knight on f6 is kind of anti-positional. Okay, so white plays d3. I play d6. I decide not to go for early d5 ideas. I'm just going to play it slow. Bishop e3. Knight d4, a typical thing in the closed Sicilian. If he ever takes the knight with the bishop, you take back with the pawn, you keep the bishop pair, you open up the c-file, semi-open c-file, and you attack there. Of course, you can't take with a knight because you take back with the pawn, you win a piece. Queen of d2 with an idea of maybe playing bishop h6 in some lines. If I had my pawn on e5 here, like in a Botvinnik system, I could play a move like bishop to h3, and if he takes with the bishop, I fork him. For instance, let's just to show you a trap. If I play e5 like a Botvinnik system and he plays h3, then I can play bishop takes h3. And if he plays bishop takes d4, I can play, let's see what Stockfish want me to play here. Stockfish, what's black's best play? It says bishop takes g2. And, bishop takes g2. He gets the pawn back. I take the bishop. He takes, and it's about equal. But he can't play bishop takes h3 because of knight f3 check. Okay, back to our game. We'll pull down the board, make it a little bigger again. Back to the game. So I castle, and he plays f4. So in some lines he can play e5, in some lines he can play f5. So I have to watch out for those. Right now I don't think those are threats. I play rook b8 with the idea of playing b5, a5, b4, and expanding on the queen side. Typical close Sicilian-y kind of play. He plays rook b1. Interesting move. It looks bad. The idea is to guard this pawn in some lines, but the idea also might be to push the pawn. All right, so I play b5, and now I think in this position, I think Stockfish wants white to play b4. And it says I can play knight e2 check, knight e2, c takes b4, rook takes b4, whoops, sorry, mouse slip. Rook takes b4, a5, rook bb1, b4, g4 with equal play. All right, so back to the game. He plays h3, and now after b4 I have a pretty nice advantage. b4, knight d1, and now I should play the obvious a5 to maintain my pawn structure. Stockfish says if I do that, I'd have about a 1.1 pawn advantage. I play queen c7, not the most accurate move, but still retaining at about a 3/4 of a pawn advantage. Brian plays knight f2. I play bishop d7, developing the bishop, keeping the bishop eyeing on both sides of the board. I want to keep an eye on that f5 break. Rook there, queen, rook on f to c8, rook c1, and now Stockfish says I should either play knight e6, or maybe a5, or even knight e2. I see that he's going to break and open the line for on my queen. So a lot of times when people develop rooks to the same file, you have the queen, you move the queen. So I move the queen, not the most accurate, but still retaining the advantage. White plays bishop takes d4, not a good move. Now I have the semi-open c file and my pawns on d4 and b4 are having a good grip on the position. White plays knight d1, getting ready to break with c3. And now I should play queen c5. For instance, queen c5, c3, b takes, and now queen a5, pinning the pawn to the queen. Rook b2, knight c6, rook cb1, rook takes b2, rook takes b2, d takes c3, knight d takes c3, knight d4, and Stockfish says I'm winning here. You know, all my pieces are good. I have the bishop pair. He's weak on the dark squares on the queen side. My knight on d4 is a monster. If he takes it off, then my bishop is probably going to win material right away. Of course, I'm not nearly as good as Stockfish, so I didn't see all that. Let's go back. All right, so instead of that, I played f5. And Stockfish says that gives up about half my advantage. Here, White should just break with c3, which he does. Best move by Brian. And now I have to figure out how I want to play this. The best way to play it, according to Stockfish, is to play b takes c3, which I do. B takes c3, hitting the queen. And now I should play queen a5, pinning his pawn, with about a 0.7 advantage. I play pawn takes pawn, and that pretty much throws away almost all my advantage. Now we're close to equal. Stockfish says Brian should take with a e knight. He takes with a d knight. That lets me play queen a5. Of course, he could take my queen there. Let's just go back for a moment. If he takes my queen, of course, I take his queen. He would have to play rook takes c8 to stop me from taking his rook with the pawn. Rook takes c8. Rook takes d6. And now I could make some problems for him. Bishop a4. If he tries to bring a knight to c3, I have too many pieces on that square, so he has to go to f2. And then I could play knight c6. I could have tried to queen the pawn right away, but he can't stop it. And black's winning. Okay, back to the game. So he can't take the queen. It's not good. He takes the pawn, which he should. He just took it with the lesser knight. I play queen a5, my best move. Brian plays rook b8, best move. Rook takes b8. And now rook c2 is best. White plays d4. That's a positional mistake because I can take on e4, and even though that activates his pieces, it isolates this pawn. So I take on e4, and if he takes with the knight, that's not good because I can trade queens and skewer his knights with rook to b2. And if he tries to guard a knight, like with rook to d1, I can just remove the guard with bishop a4, and he can resign. So he can't take with a knight. He has to take with the bishop, which he does. And I still have the other knight in a pin. And now I play one of my, I think this is it, where I play one of my best moves of the game. I play d5. Normally you don't do stuff like this. When you have a pawn on a semi-open file, you don't push up the pawn next to it to make the pawn on the semi-open file backward. But I have something specific in mind, which is I can force the bishop to go to one diagonal or the other, and then, depending on where he goes, I can take advantage of him. For instance, suppose he stays on the long diagonal with bishop g2. I can start attacking this pawn. For instance, Stockfish gives rook to b4. And I can follow up with knight f5 or knight c6. And he's going to have trouble defending that isolated pawn. If he brings the bishop the other way, let's say he plays bishop to c2, again, I could start attacking the pawn with knight c6, and it's going to be very tough for him to defend the pawn, and his pieces are a little bit awkwardly placed. So in the game, Brian decided to play bishop d3, which I think is his best move. Yeah, Engine says bishop d3 is best. So now, the best way for me to pile up on that d-pawn is to start with knight c6. And if I did do that, I'm pretty much winning according to the Engine. Unfortunately, I thought I could go that way, but now if he takes the knight, not only is he guarding the pawn, but he's not losing the bishop pair. I already have the bishop pair. So there's no reason that he shouldn't take that knight. And he does. He takes the knight. And now I have to decide which way to take. But unfortunately, after knight f5, all my advantage is gone. Knight c6 was almost winning. Knight f5, not so good. All right, so I take with the g-pawn. Stockfish says maybe it was slightly better to take with this pawn. I didn't want to isolate my d-pawn with the knight attacking it, but now I do have a very weak backward pawn on the semi-open file, and I can't block it with a knight on the square. So my bishop pair is still pretty good, but it's not quite as good as it was before. And here, Brian's best idea is to actually start to reposition the knight to get into e5 and force me to trade off my dark squared bishop. So knight g1 is the best move, where the game's pretty equal. Brian plays rook c2, which is also okay. I play queen to b4. I might have a slight advantage here, but not the kind of advantage I had before. Brian plays queen d3 to finally get out of the pin. I play queen a3. I say, let's try a different pin now. He says, all right, you want to repeat positions? We can do that. I play rook to b4, trying to tie down his pieces to guarding the d-pawn. And now Stockfish says he should play the break move, g5. Why is that a break move? Pawn break is a pawn move that attacks a pawn that can't easily go past it. Well, if he plays g4, my pawn is fixed. I can't go past it. So a pawn move that attacks another pawn that can't easily go past it is a break move. And Stockfish wants to play that break move with just about equality. It gives minus 0.13 here. So Brian plays knight to d1. Not a bad move. Stockfish's evaluation doesn't go up too much for me. Of course, as you know, with engines, if you make the best move, the evaluation doesn't change. When you make the less than best move, then it moves toward the opponent's side. So when white moves, the value can't go up. It can only go down. So here it said minus 0.13 before. Now it's like minus 0.2 or something. All right, says I have nothing better than to admit my last move was not too productive and bring my rook back to b8. I play bishop to b5. Engine now says 0, 0, 0. Still suggests white should play the break. White plays check. Perfectly good move. Now I have to decide, do I want to run my king around? Do I want to pin my bishop? I decide to run my king up. In both cases, it's 0, 0, 0. Now he should keep checking me and see what I do, because I could make a mistake here. For instance, suppose he checks and I run up. That actually loses. Stockfish gives knight on e to c3. And if I play something like bishop f1, then queen e3 hitting this pawn, rook to b6 guarding the pawn, g4 breaking through on the king side, and it says white's completely winning here, plus 3.6. So this is one of those positions where if he checks me, I might have to take a draw, move my king back. In fact, I would have to do that. Brian decides to play h4, I guess with the idea that if I want to start bringing the king up, he can menace me a little bit. And Stockfish says I should play h5 here with a nice little advantage of about 0.9. For instance, h5, rook checks. Now I can play king g6. And if he can't play g4 the break anymore, and trying to get the knight in doesn't work anymore. For instance, knight in, just bishop takes d4, knight f3. Well, he can't do that because queen takes f3. So just doesn't work. All right, so I should play h5 here. I played bishop f6. All right, so let's talk about this for a minute. I looked at sacrificing a rook here. So I took a lot of time on this move. Remember, we're playing without a clock. And I said, what happens if I play queen f3 and go for like mate around his king? So I looked at queen f3 with the idea that if he plays queen takes b4, I can play queen takes e2 check, and maybe my queen and my bishop can get in and mate him. But unfortunately, I can't. King h3, queen checks, king h2, and the best I have is a draw. Also, white doesn't have to take the rook. He could play rook checks first. And now when I play king to g8, now he can play knight to g1, hitting my queen and hitting my rook. And if I try to guard the rook with the queen, he has queen to e1, threatening queen takes e6 check. And already I'm losing because I can't play queen to a6 to guard the pawn because queen takes b4 wins the rook now when I don't have any checks. Well, I have queen takes a2 check, but that's one check. So white's winning if I do that. So I spent a lot of time looking at queen f3, and I convinced myself that it wasn't very good. So I said, well, how can I make a move that kind of waits and maybe helps my king a little bit? So I thought for a long time, and I played bishop f6. So the story is, in 2008, the best computer in the world was Ribka. And I had a latest version of Ribka, and I went home and I put the game into the computer, and I said, Ribka, what should I play here? Queen f3 is no good. And Ribka goes, right, queen f3 is no good. But it said, bishop f6 is your best move. And I said, unbelievable, my waiting move is the best move. So I felt really good about that for years. Unfortunately, now I have Stockfish 12, which is much stronger than Ribka. And I gave it this position, and it said, no, Dan, you shouldn't play bishop f6. You should play h5. Bishop f6 is only good for equality, and if you play h5, then black is better, maybe even winning. So here I was. I played this little quiet move, and Ribka told me it was the best move. And now here we are 12 years later, and Stockfish says, sorry, Dan, but h5 was the right move. Okay. All right, so now white has to do something. If he plays rook checks now, I can start zigzagging my king. I can play king e8. If he plays rook takes h7, Stockfish says I should just play a6 with equality. Well, if that's true, do I have any better? No. I could play king g8 with equality or bishop e7 with equality. Bishop e7. I think that was my idea, but he could just play knight ec3. And it's back to equal again. So that's all he has to do, is give me that check again. Instead, he plays king to h3. This is actually kind of a sui mate move, because all of a sudden, his king side is vulnerable to double attacks. And I looked at the board and I said, boy, that move I wanted to play on the previous move, it's now a killer, because if he takes the rook, I made him in one. So I looked at queen f3 and I said, I don't see any defense. I'm threatening to take the knight. I'm threatening mate in one, and all the moves that stop mate in one lose material. For instance, he doesn't have any moves with a knight on e2 that stop mate in one. If he plays knight to f2, then, I mean, I have all kinds of ways to win on knight f2. I can just play, well, let's ask Stockfish what's the best way to beat knight f2. Knight f2, Stockfish says, take here. And now, clearly, he can't play queen takes b4 because of bishop f1 check, king h2, queen g2 mate. So I'm just winning a piece and I'm ready to win another piece. So there's no defense. Obviously, queen b4 gets mated in 1. What other moves stop mate in 1? He could play queen e1, but, you know, I still have that same idea of playing bishop e2, and he still can't take the rook because I've got the mate. So I'm just winning on the spot all of a sudden. Queen f3, no defense. So in the game, Brian played knight on 1 to c3, and I played queen h1, and Brian paid me my $5, and I said thank you for the game, and I had a nice story to tell. So just like Josh in Searching for Bobby Fischer, and Beth in The King's Gambit, I don't play in the park a lot, but I've got at least one park story. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed today's story. I hope you watched the videos in the channel. I think I'm up to almost 150 now. I've covered almost every single facet of what you would need to improve. Openings, endgames, thought process, evaluation, analysis, time management. You name it, it's all there. So if you need help getting better at chess, I have 12 books. I've got all those videos. I cover like every area of improvement that you could possibly want. Hopefully, if you need some help, go check it out. And if you like the video, of course, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends about it. Telling your friends is probably the most important thing, because we want other people to get a chance to have access to these free good videos as well. Okay, talk to you next time. Bye.